Big winner at Oregon, big loser thus far at UCLA. Talking Chip Kelly with Tony Siracusa from Last Word on College Football. Tony, how you doing tonight?
Hey, Mark. Always good to join you.
Absolutely. So I am fascinated and have stated this many times in our, dozens, hundreds of conversations at this point throughout the years concerning UCLA football.
Yeah.
Based on location, based on brand name, recognizable, and then also the talent pool in the area. I think this is a sleeping giant, and I would have thought that Chip Kelly would be the guy to get it turned around and headed on the right track and maybe finish some things and some progress that Jim Mora had established there at UCLA. Let's start with your thoughts just overall about Chip Kelly's performance at UCLA thus far.
Yeah, look, you would have reason to think that Chip Kelly could come in, put aside his NFL tenure in Philadelphia and San Francisco, just look at him as a college football coach. You'd have I would be with you. You'd say, look, this guy is the guy to bring UCLA to the next level, right? And UCLA has been missing even being close to the next level for a long time. If you listen to any UCLA fan, you know the history of UCLA. You know it was the December game, 1998 in Miami. There was a makeup game when the September game was canceled by a hurricane. And UCLA was 2.5 minutes away from playing in the first ever BCS championship game and lost. They made Edger and James a lot more money that day because, he just ran all over their defense. The program has not been the same since. And I know that sounds dramatic, not the same since 1998. They've not been close to that level since then. It's not that, they've been good. They haven't been close to that relevant since then. Bob Toledo was the coach then and was, if you believe the rumors, which I know that some of them were not rumors, they were on the verge of some NCAA problems. And so Toledo had to go 2 years after that loss in Miami. So they went to the exact opposite. They went to Carl Durrell, probably the squeakiest, cleanest coach that there could possibly be, but way in over his head. It was his first ever head coaching job at UCLA. And a place like UCLA, that should not be on the job training for a head coach. You should have made your mark somewhere else first. But he was a Bruin and he'd been an assistant before and he had a winning record, but it was the most bland, uneventful, uninspiring term you could think of. So they went the opposite. Then they swung in the other direction, went and got Rick Neuheisel. Hey, he's fun, he's entertaining. Matter of fact, he was Durrell's teammate at UCLA when Neuheisel was a quarterback. And this is fun, but come on, Neuheisel has not maintained a winner anywhere he ever went. He started off big at Colorado and got worse the longer he stayed. Same thing at Washington. He was a fixer of programs, not a creator of new things after that. So he didn't last long. His last game was a 50-0 blowout loss to USC when the Bruins wore all white uniforms and what have become known as the surrender uniforms. You haven't seen them since. They bring in Mora. And here's where we get into the weeds with UCLA fans. Some say should have kept him longer. Some say he stayed too long, didn't take advantage of the talent he had. He had some really good recruiting classes, but what did he make out of them? Had some bowl games, had a good Alamo Bowl win, things like that, but not enough. And here's where we get into what you started this conversation with. The location, the advantages of UCLA, all the college football talent that's in Southern California. Look, last year, 6 of the top 25 high schools for high school football in the country were in Southern California. It's insane. St. John Bosco was the #1 team in the country. Mater Dei in Orange County was right behind them. How do you not get more talent? So he burned some bridges in the athletic department, and then they took the hire away from the athletic director, Dan Guerrero. They're like, you're not going to make this call by yourself. We're going to have a committee. And it was Guerrero and it was Josh Rebholz, the senior associate athletic director, and it was Troy Aikman and it was major donor Casey Wasserman, who has his own sports and entertainment agency. And they go get Chip Kelly. When everybody was convinced Chip was going to Florida, everybody except a few of us, because they were like, they've had 7 meetings with him and still didn't close him. They're not going to get Chip. And all of a sudden, within 2 weeks, he's at UCLA. Wow, this is huge. Look, Kelly was 46-7 at Oregon in his 4 years there, and 33-3 in conference. This is huge. This was the biggest name hire that UCLA had ever made in its football program. And it has been an unmitigated disaster for the last 2 years. There is no putting makeup on this and making it pretty and saying, well, yeah, except for this, he'd be okay. Well, except for that, he'd be okay. Chip spends so much of his time with the media, which, let's start, he doesn't spend much time with the media at all. During practice weeks, 15 minutes on Wednesday mornings before practice starts, and then, of course, his post-game stuff. Chip will always tell you how young UCLA is. Well, we're young. We got so much youth. We're young. We're one of the youngest teams in the country. A couple times last year, he took that too. We are the youngest team in the country, which was not true. They were one of the youngest team, maybe one of the 6, 7, 8 youngest teams in the country. But in 2 years, he's 7-17 overall and 7-11 in conference. And the Rose Bowl is predominantly empty most games. And he's got one notable win. Seriously. I mean, he beat USC in 2018. That's his most notable win. And man, it has been a brutal 2 years.
So yeah, let that record sink in, folks. 33-3 in 4 seasons, playing 9 games a year in conference at Oregon. That is elite, top of the line. That's what you will find at Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, winning like 92% of your games in conference in what was a stronger conference then.
Mm-hmm.
And he certainly was set up for success to a certain extent. It was a good program, but it was more like a top 25 program. He made Oregon a top 5 program and came within that much of winning a national championship, losing to a great Auburn, Cam Newton-led team by a field goal at the gun. That's how successful he was. So the big question after going through 2 NFL stints, that is looked upon as being a failure. But if you really look at it, he had a nice season in Philadelphia. I don't think that there was a whole lot to go on there. 1 good season, 1 down season in Philadelphia. Then the San Francisco job just didn't work out. But now he comes to UCLA, and what he was known for was this cutting edge offense that 5 and 6 years later, well, is this going to be a difference maker since it seems to be what everyone else is now doing? And is he going to have the personnel in place to do it, first of all? And secondly, again, is it going to just be run of the mill, what everyone sees now anyway? And has he lost that one bullet in his gun that nobody else had at the time?
I think all of those are true. I think all of that is true to a large degree. It's a combination of all of that. Look, when he came to UCLA, he did not have the talent on that team that was there. He came in December, locked up whatever recruits that Jim Mora had already put on the table, didn't really have a chance to get much more. You and I both know that early December period, that early December signing day is now the real signing day. The February one, you're looking at whatever is left over for the most part. So there wasn't really a lot there to run the Oregon-style offense. That having been said, he made it clear he wasn't going to run that kind of offense. Things are different. Times have changed. You got to look at what we've got and build around that. Okay, reasonable. I think UCLA fans were hoping to see that high-powered Oregon offense. But even in his second and now third recruiting classes, he hasn't recruited to that style of offense because I don't think that he thinks he can run it anymore. That was then. This was years ago that we did this. College football has changed. The schemes have changed. Teams are on to it, more than, like you said, it kind of caught teams by surprise, defenses by surprise a little bit back then at just how fast they were and how much the entire offense was constantly on the move. There was always someone in motion at the snap of the ball. You never had people just sitting there. And so the game has changed, and I think Chip is still trying to find a way to change. One of the things that hampers Chip is, I think you and I can agree, we've known and talked to so many college football coaches and even pro coaches over the years. Coaches are inherently stubborn. You have to be. You have to be a bit of an egomaniac to think you're good enough to do the job. You have to be stubborn enough to think your way is the right way. Chip's stubbornness is a hindrance at times because he is so loyal to people and so loyal to the staff that he brought in that the loyalty and the stubbornness have proven to be a bad match when it comes to that defense. UCLA, he has known Jerry Azzinaro, worked with him in Philadelphia, worked with him in San Francisco. He's the defensive coordinator now going into year 3 at UCLA. He just got a new 1-year contract when his first 2-year deal ran out. The UCLA defense has been one of the worst in the country for the last 2 years, and there was zero sense that Chip was going to make a change at defensive coordinator because he is loyal to Azzinaro. He will not do it. Maybe Azzinaro could have retired on his own. He's up there in years. He's older than Chip, but he didn't. And, Chip brought in Brian Norwood as the defensive back coach. He was the co-defensive defensive coordinator at Navy. And there's a sense that maybe he's going to have a role in scheming the defense because there's got to be something. There's got to be change. UCLA has had talent. It was not a talentless defense the last 2 years. But they looked lost out there in Azzinaro's defense. You look at a guy like Darnay Holmes, who just got drafted, in the NFL. And, man, we weren't sure because you look at his last couple of games in Azzinaro's defense, and he was getting lost out there even after 2 years of running this defense. At that point, you got to say, man, it's the coaching, not the talent, not the players. But that's who Chip is, for better or for worse. He's going to stick with his guys.
Tony, we discussed the numbers at the time of a conversation we had, I believe, when Chip Kelly was first named the head coach, and I just verified them, just ran through the recruiting rankings. It's eerily similar, based on the recruiting rankings, how good the talent was at UCLA when Chip Kelly arrived versus what he had in winning 33 of 36 games at Oregon.
Right.
These recruiting classes that Jim Mora brought in that brought obviously stocked the roster for Chip Kelly were ranked 20, 19, 13, and 12 in the country.
Yeah.
Right around 15th in the nation, and that's what Chip Kelly did at Oregon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's for those who want to buy into the Chip Kelly story, they're pitching that Mora left the cupboard bare. Well, that's nonsense. You and I have talked so many times over the last 2 seasons, post-game scenarios. Josh Kelly was a Jim Mora recruit. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, your starting quarterback, was a Jim Mora recruit. These guys that are playing were Jim Mora. If they're good enough to play they were Jim Mora recruits who are now playing for Chip Kelly. Kelly, now, let's be honest also. Kelly has run off a lot of players. There are upwards of 70 early departures during Chip Kelly's tenure. Now, some of those were grad transfers. You and I both know grad transfers rarely stay in their original school. And it has become clear based on players I've talked to, Chip Kelly encourages his grad transfer level players to go somewhere else because he tells them you've got a better chance. Getting into grad school at UCLA is so hard. You've probably got a better chance going somewhere else because they don't acknowledge that you're an athlete for us and give you a little extra check mark there. You go in blank like any other student in the country, and it makes it hard. And so you're probably better off trying somewhere else for that last year. He's had early departures for the NFL. He had 1 player drafted last year, Caleb Wilson, the tight end. He had 3 players drafted this year into the NFL. He had Devin Asiasi, and he had Josh Kelly, and he had Darnay Holmes. The kicker, J.J. Molson, was drafted into the Canadian Football League. the great irony of a Molson going into the Canadian Football League. And he had Chris Barnes was signed as an undrafted free agent. That left 4 or 5 other players who were there for the draft who went nowhere. Were they not good enough? Did they not learn enough? Were they hampered by the lack of pro days because of the COVID-19 virus shutting everything down? I talked to a couple of agents immediately after the draft, like within a half hour, and they were like, yeah, I was told my guy would have gone a little bit higher if they'd seen him at pro days and seen him do what they wanted him to do instead of just, sending film or, whatever they saw at the combine. But there are players now, it's like, are they good? And when you have players who don't get drafted and they were elite level recruits and now they're undrafted, that dings the program, because all these kids, you get high school kids, they all think they're going to play in the league, right? And when you see players who they think are really good, who aren't getting a call from the NFL, it starts to ding the program.
So do we think that Chip Kelly is receiving the support from the administration via facilities, money to pay assistant coaches, and just commitment to football and being a football winner in the Pac-12?
We're in an interesting position with the administration. One, he does have the facilities. Right as he got there, they had finished building the Wasserman Center, named after the donor that we had talked about. Beautiful state-of-the-art football-only facility for practices. And the assistant coaches are paid well. They're not paid SEC well. And, of course, the cost of living in and around the greater LA area is much more. So, there's a little bit of – they've gotten raises over the past few years in terms of this position. We'll make this much. But bearing in mind it's a state-run school, there's always going to be limitations. Now, where it gets a little bit interesting is the guy who hired him is on the way out the door. Dan Guerrero, after 20-some-odd years as the athletic director, is retiring. And this has been known for the entire academic year. He will retire next month, actually, in about 3 weeks. And there has been a 4-month-long search for his successor. Now, Guerrero has had tremendous success in the non-revenue sports at UCLA. And he has had great success in hiring coaches at UCLA in the non-revenue sports. Baseball, they have a spectacular coach in John Savage, and their softball coach, and, their swim and dive coach, and, some water polo coach, that type of stuff. Great coaches up and down the line. They're men's and women. Well, he didn't hire the men's tennis coach, but the women's tennis coach. Great hires all across the board. But he hired Carl Durrell, and he hired Rick Neuheisel and Jim Mora, 50-50 on that. He hired Steve Alford, for basketball, which again, unmitigated disaster. So the revenue sports have not done well under him, and he is retiring. They've gone through a long process. It's an interesting process that is probably unlike most other schools that you and I are used to talking to. They have a committee at the school, a search committee, which is going to do the ultimate hire. Almost nobody from within athletics is on that committee. It is almost completely the academic side. Professors, department heads. That is who UCLA is. Gene Block, the chancellor of the school, when he came in, said, I'm going to make this school the Harvard of the West. I think Stanford has that one pegged. Maybe you can become the Stanford of the South, whatever, who knows, But that is who UCLA is. And so they have spent the time looking for an outsider because they want a fresh voice. So Josh Rebholz, who was considered the heir apparent for quite some time as the senior associate athletic director, is out. He didn't even make it to the final round of interviews. He's out of the picture. They've had some guys. There was a former UCLA player who's now the athletic director at Fresno State, Terry Toomey. Would have been a great choice because he understands the UCLA culture, that this is the academic university that is accepting of the athletics. but yet he went and got his administrative credentials elsewhere, so he's still an outsider. Didn't even make it to the second round of interviews, inexplicably. Just stunning. They were closing in on the athletic director from UNLV, and then she bailed out, probably within about 72 hours of actually signing the deal. So Martin Jarmond from Boston College is probably going to be the guy, unless he messes up his own, negotiation. And he's had time at Ohio State and Boston College, so he's got some credentials. I don't think the UCLA fan base will, I think they're going to have to hit Google and find out who this guy is, because what does that mean for Chip Kelly? Well, the guy who hired him is gone. When he came here, he didn't know Guerrero would be retiring. Chip's going to get this year, whatever this year looks like, based on, changes because of the virus. He's going to get this year. He was always going to get this year. What does it mean beyond this upcoming season, though? I think that, another, sub 500 season with no bowl game and a half empty Rose Bowl stadium, not going to cut it at all. I mean, he's got a 5-year deal. He's in year 3. The buyouts are always manageable. UCLA, because of where it is, has enough deep pockets with the boosters that the buyouts are always doable.
And what it looks like for Chip Kelly is an opportunity to win some ball games. Not that it's an easy schedule, but there's no Oklahoma on the schedule this year. There's no big Power 5 team in the non-conference. So you've got New Mexico State, Hawaii on the road, San Diego State on the road. UCLA could come out of that 3-0 or 1-2, but at the same time, they're supposed to win those games. But of course, they and other teams in the Pac-12 have had issues, certainly with San Diego State in particular. There's no Oregon, there's no Washington on the Pac-12 schedule.
Right, exactly. They miss Oregon this year. They miss Washington this year. So, there's a little bit. You got USC at home. That's all well and good. You're looking at a Utah team that has to replace a boatload of talent that went. Utah was the biggest winner out of all the Pac-12 schools in the NFL draft in terms of players that went. Arizona State is a young and talented team. USC has, to me, probably the best quarterback in the conference, in Keaton Slovis. So there is no easy path. He's when he went to spring camp, ironically enough, because of health, because of returning players, he had the biggest spring camp roster he has had yet. He had 90 players at spring camp, where usually he's in the mid-60s. Then he had 2 weeks of spring camp and was shut down because of the virus. So, it's kind of like, wow, Chip's finally got something good to talk about. And COVID-19, plays a zone defense against him and shuts him down.
Well, Chip Kelly will either turn it around, or he will have a similar length of tenure at UCLA than he did at Oregon, just for different reasons.
Right.
Tony Siragusa from Last Word on College Football, breaking down Chip Kelly's stay at UCLA and what it's going to take to get it turned around after 7-17 the first 2 seasons. Tony, we appreciate you stopping by.
Always glad to do it, Mark.